Halacha Zayin in Ko'elos Korban Pesach. Gershon is a guy between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. A ger that became converted between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. And now, Pesach Rishon, he wasn't obligated to bring a Korban Pesach. So let's take a look at the Peirush. And he was still a goy by the first Pesach. So to a minor who became an adult between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. And now, Chayov Lazis Pesach Sheni. The Rambam says they're both obligated. The Kesef Mishnah cites a Machlokes in Sochim 93a. Mosdos is the opinion that Pesach Sheni is a rectification of the first. And somebody who's chayiv in Pesach Rishon, he didn't bring it, then he can bring it. But if somebody wasn't chayiv, doesn't have to bring it, because he wasn't chayiv in the first one, so he doesn't have to bring the second one. The Rebbe is of the opinion that Pesach Sheni is its own festival, and somebody didn't bring in the first, he has to bring in the second. So the Gemara gives an example. A cotton that became an adult or a convert it was a guy between two Pesachim. It would seem that according to Rebbe, he's chayiv to bring on the second Pesach a korban, because it's its own. It stands on its own. And the Rambam paskins, according to the cloud, that halacha is like Rebbe when it's one person against him. And the Marikorkis brings the whole thing, and we learned it earlier. If Shochat Olov, if he slaughtered on the cotton, the Rishon, Pesach Rishon, Potter, so the cotton ate from the Pesach Rishon, therefore he's Potter from making the Pesach Sheni. So the Kesef Mishnah questions, how could it be that which he brought on the cotton Pesach Rishon, he should be considered that the cotton fulfilled his obligation? He wasn't chayiv in Pesach. And especially according to the Rambam, that the second one is its own festival, the cotton is liable, and the second one is Minat Torah. The first one now he's not liable Minat Torah. So the source of is found in Rosh Hashanah 28a, that they asked Avur, the father of Shmuel was asked, Kofoi, if they forced a person on the night of Pesach and he ate matzah, did he fulfill his obligations? So the Gemara says, who forced him? If a demon overtook him, we learned if a person is not sane, and at times, and sometimes he is sane, therefore he's chayav mitzvahs. When at the moment that he's insane, so there's a temporary insanity, and therefore he's part from all the mitzvahs. He is the source for temporary insanity. And Torah Evan in Rosh Hashanah 28a says that the question is, since at that moment it was a shoiter and he's porter from the mitzvahs and achidas hamatzah, and that moment was not an action of mitzvah, so he ate it. Now he's sane. So at the moment when he ate it, he wasn't obligated. Did it fulfill his obligation or not? Because every person that does something like a monkey, he's not fulfilling his obligation. And this is the question of the Kesef Mishnah. According to the Rambam, if the cotton was not obligated, then why should it fulfill his obligation not to bring a korban Pesach Sheni? And so the Reb Chaim Brisk explains that this is the intent of the Kesef Mishnah. And the Kesef Mishnah cites that the Mari gives answers that since the Torah added from the Pasuk Sela Bayis that a cotton is included in the Korban Pesach in some fashion, therefore he doesn't have to bring the Pesach Sheni. Chaim Brisker says, but the end of the Sugi in the Durham 36a is that when you point a cotton on a Pesach, it's not Midin Torah, because Minat Torah you can't do it. And Sela Beis Ovis is not Minat Torah, it's only Rabbanan. If that's the case, he didn't fulfill his Torah Dikadin of eating a Korban Pesach, and so questions the Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch wants to answer that it could be that the cotton is not liable with Pesach Sheni if he ate from the Pesach Rishon, because when he did the Mitzvah Rabbanan, that fulfills his Mitzvah Deraisa. And that we can understand the answer of the Marikorkis. And the Minchas Chinuch explains that the basis that even if Sel Abayis Ovis is not Minat Torah, there's an obligation on our Bonon to teach a child, as we find in Tosis Sochem 91b, that even if Sel Abayis Ovis is not a Raisa, from the obligation of education, you have to put him on the Pesach. And since with our Bonon, you appoint the cotton, therefore he fulfills his obligation, so that even when he becomes a Godel between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, he fulfilled his obligation in the rabbinical, and that fulfills his obligation of the deraisa of Pesach Sheni. The Menachos Chinuch at the end pushes this away, because this is a very big question as to whether doing a mitzvah rabbanon fulfills your obligation of mitzvah deraisa. Reb Chaim is masber. According to the Rambam, it's different Achilas Pesach from Achilas Matzah. There's a differentiation. Pesach, besides the mitzvah to bring the Pesach and to eat it, there's also a din of bringing the korban, and it should be counted for him. But like every korban atones, and by Cheresh Shred V'Kotten, the Torah didn't obligate them with a mitzvah, and they are not obligated not to transgress this, but they're part of Klal Yisrael, and they're not separate from all the laws. Even though they don't have to bring a Pesach, still it can be brought for them, and it's called a Pesach for them. And therefore the din is in the Mishnah that an orphan that is two executors, or his executors slaughtered for him, he's counted on the executor's Pesach, and he can eat either by either one of the executors, whichever one he wants. So Chaim therefore explains that there is on the cotton the onus of being counted on a Pesach. That's why it says in the Brisa, the person slaughters a Pesach for himself and for his children, his son and daughters who are minors, because they have an obligation. And therefore the Pesach of the Rambam is the cotton that they brought for him for the first one. They fulfilled his obligation of bringing, and therefore he doesn't have to bring Pesach Sheni. When it comes to matzah, there's no obligation on anyone at the time. In other words, a person who's not sane has no obligation. Therefore, what he's eating without an obligation. Therefore, once he becomes sane, he has to eat again, because what he ate previously doesn't count. Chaim adds, in the obligation of keeping the mitzvah, matzah is different from Korban Pesach. The Pesach, the mitzvah, is not only on him, but it's on the actual bringing the korban. That it should be for the owners. By matzah, it's only the action of eating the matzah, and there's no concept that the matzah has somehow been consecrated, and therefore a cheresh and a shoyt and a cotton are not obligated with matzah. There's no fulfilling of the mitzvah of matzah. But an adult that ate matzah, that's the key of the mitzvah. And that's, we can understand the words of the Rambam, that if he became an adult between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, he doesn't have to bring a korban Pesach Sheni, because not only was the korban Pesach brought for him to fulfill his obligation, but he also fulfilled it himself, because it happens by itself when they bring the korban Pesach, which atones for him. Whereas matzah, he has to do a physical action of eating it when he's with the correct idea. And there's no chiyuv of eating a matzah on Pesach Sheni if you don't have a korban Pesach with it. Reb Chaim goes further and explains, even according to the opinion at Celebase Overs, that a set for the household is not the Raisa, it doesn't mean that Ktanim are not able to be counted, just that a person can slaughter his Pesach for his children, because there's a concept of bringing the Korban Pesach. And this, everyone agrees that is included in Celebase Overs. The appointment is the Raisa. And we also have Avodim. So the Odom can point him on his Pesach without their knowledge. Like the Gemara says, and also the Rambam says, that a person slaughters for his children who are minors, or for all of his slaves without their asking them. And by avodim, the appointment of the slave on the korban is deraisa, because we know that noshim achayev and pesach, and avodim achayev and mitzvahs ki isha, like a woman, and therefore they also chayev korban pesach min Torah. When he appoints them to the odin, even though it's without his knowledge, they become automatically counted on the pesach. When you bring the korban pesach, they fulfill their obligation. So two ktanim are added from the posuk of Sela Boyas, that the father can appoint them, and they therefore are considered having fulfilled their obligation. They took part in the Pesach. When it says Sela Boyas is lav deraisa, it's not min Torah. That means that there's no obligation for the child who's a minor to bring it if he doesn't have someone bringing it for him. That's why the Mishnah says in Psachim 87a that a yosem, that the executives slaughtered for him, two of them, he can go to wherever he wants. And what does it mean? Sela Bayis mikol mokim. As long as he's counted, anyone can be counted. Rabbi Chaim means that even though minors are not obligated in Pesach, still that's only the obligation of the mitzvah. But when they are appointed on the Korban Pesach, even though it's not to their knowledge, they are counted and they fulfill their obligation. Therefore, a kotan a minor who became an adult between the two Pesachim, he's not obligated to do a Korban Pesach Sheni because he fulfilled an obligation of Pesach. But Reb Chaim points out that Tosfos doesn't explain it that way in Reb Zera, because Tosfos questions how can you give a kotan the meat of the Pesach? It's not eaten only to those who are counted. The Tosfos answers it's only permitted because of chinuch mitzvahs. But the Ran explains that the Isser to give for the Pesach to those who are numbered on it is only for those who can be numbered and didn't do so, and therefore they're precluded from eating from a Korban Pesach. But minors that aren't obligated to be counted, then they're not considered as not being counted, and he explains the Ran. Therefore, according to the Tosfos and the Ran, that if Sela Bayis always is not their raisa, the kotan can only eat from the Korban Pesach, not because it was brought from him, but rather because there's no obligation of him being, he's not excluded from eating from the Korban Pesach, because he's included in Sela Bayis, meaning that he can eat from it, but he's not included in the mitzvah. And according to them, there would be a problem of why he doesn't have to bring a Korban Pesach Sheni. The Kilas Yankiv, the Stipler, the contemporary Kilas Yankiv, explains that kotan that the Korban Pesach was brought from in Pesach Rishon is potter from Hasheni, because the reason is that min Torah he doesn't have to be counted, because they are secondary to their parents. The Gemara means Sela Bayis always lav deraisa. There's no obligation to give it to them, but if they're put on it, then definitely they fulfill their obligation. Kilas Yankiv proves this from what the Rambam writes in Perek Beis Halacha Ches, that a person can bring and slaughter for his minor children or for his slaves, whether they know about it or they don't know about it. According to the Rambam, the word zecho of his males and his slaves keep him from bringing a Korban Pesach, because they are part and parcel of their father's Korban Pesach or the masters, even without their knowledge, and therefore they can tie to the mitzvah, and not because they have an obligation to circumcise them, and not because it's his son or his eved. Therefore, by his sons when they're minors, that's an obligation of the father which he didn't fulfill. Therefore, he's prevented from eating and making a Korban Pesach if he didn't circumcise them, and he's not permitted to slaughter without their knowledge for the adult sons, because they're not included in Sela Bayis, because adult sons have their own domain. And even if we'll say that the mitzvah of Milah is obligatory on the father when he becomes an adult, still the Milo, it does not prevent the father, because regarding Pesach, they are not secondary to the father like their sons. But the circumcision of his slaves and the immersion of his maidservants keep the father from bringing a korban Pesach, even if they're adults, because it's his obligation, and if they are circumcised, in other words, if they would be circumcised, he would have to give for them, even without their knowledge, or against their knowledge. He goes further and explains, even when the master is not obligated to circumcise his slaves, meaning they're still goyim, still according to the Rambam, they keep the master from bringing a korban Pesach because they're part of the household, as we learned earlier in the previous broken, and therefore the Shagasari's question of how could the Rambam write that an Odin who didn't circumcise his avodim is kept from eating the korban Pesach, where the Rambam get it from? The Rambam, the answer is, according to Reb Chaim, the reason is because they are his acquisitions, and even though they're still goyim, it still prevents him, since he has a household that it was not totally Jewish. And so we see Selabayas means that all those who are worthy to be part of the household and to eat in the korban Pesach may do so. Now we understand why the circumcision of the slaves of a cotton do not prevent the cotton from being on a korban, because he doesn't have a household. They're not really his regarding Selabayas, because he himself is not obligated, but his father can separate for him, and so too Yosem, the Apotropos, the executors, can separate for them, for the minors, without their knowledge, even if they have avodim who were not circumcised. And with this we can explain that even though the Rambam is Selabayas is not their Raisa, still he brings a korban Pesach. He doesn't have to bring a korban Pesach Sheni, but we know that Rambam says Selabayis is not their Raisa, because he says Odam Einam Avish Pesach HaGadol Shalom Midaitoi. So you're seeing that he says that the household doesn't mean that it's obligation on everyone in the household, but rather that since they're in the household, those that are part of it have to be kosher to bring a korban Pesach, so that the master or the father can bring a korban Pesach.